Hello, world. Welcome to the Elise Morgan Experience. And today, my guest is Nichole Haugen. She is a wife, mom to six daughters, which could very well be a whole different podcast episode. And she's a nurse and grief coach. She spent over 10 years as a hospice nurse, helping families through hard times. Nichole knows a lot about grief, both from her job and her own life. In 2019, her dad passed away after a long fight with cancer. And just 4 months later, her mom died suddenly in a winter storm. On top of that, she discovered her husband had been hiding financial problems for over 10 years. Through all of this, Nichole found a path to healing, forgiveness, and learning to live with grief. Now, as a grief coach, she supports others on their grief journeys, helping them feel understood and reminding them that they don't have to face it alone. So, welcome, Nichole. And like
Thank
I
you.
said, just having six children, let alone daughters, is that's a whole task in and of itself. And of course, that's not what this podcast is about. But just having that alone
Yeah.
to the mix is that's a big to do. But first and foremost, how about you just introduce yourself to the listeners and a little bit about your story and what led you to here.
Yeah. So basically, I was, working, doing what everybody does. Like I'd work and my husband would work and we'd come home and switch in and out and, just having babies and babies and babies and life was hectic and busy, but it was fine, or I thought it was fine. And then all of a sudden, like, the world kind of crumbles around you and you realize like, oh my gosh, like how what I really realized was how I'd been living like really was not healthy. Like I wasn't taking time for myself at all. My husband, like, we didn't do date nights. We didn't, it was just survival mode all the time, lack of sleep when you're having kids. And then when my dad died, especially, it just kind of put everything on pause and really focused on that. We didn't know, like, we got him on hospice. He was on that for 3 months. So we had 3 months, but you don't know that. You don't know how much time you're going to have. And so everything kind of pauses. And then it was after dad died, it was like, okay, like deep breath, life will get back to normal. And then mom died, and it was just like, oh my gosh, like everything was just so hard, so difficult. You could barely function. Like trying to make decisions on anything was just overwhelming. And then, of course, having six kids was just like exhausting. And then finding out about the financial stuff with my husband and even questioning like, do I want to stay married? Do I want to work through this? Do I not? Like, what does that look like? And then shortly after that, COVID hit. And so everything, like a whole world was just like
Shut down.
crazy and upside down. Like nobody knew what was going on. And so I just felt very isolated, lonely, even more so because I think at that time, like everybody was, grieving something because
Mhm.
whether you grieve the loss of going to work every day or financial change during that time, or you had family members who were sick and you were scared for them. And so everybody was grieving, and I felt very angry for a long time that I felt like people weren't giving me the recognition that I felt I deserved and everything I was struggling with, which, kind of is silly now looking back, but you really feel that. You really feel that. And that's what I want to help people with is really that I don't know who to talk to. I don't know where to go. I know that I'm struggling, but it seems like everybody I talk to just gives the like, cliche, like, well, they're in a better place, or like, well, we all go through things. Like, yes, but when you're personally going through it, like, it's so hard.
Yeah, and, let's backtrack a little bit. So first and foremost, your job is
Mhm.
was or is are you still currently working as a hospice nurse? No. So you're
No, no.
fully doing the grief coach.
Yep.
Great. Okay. But if anyone, you are a hospice nurse, so you are there and really seeing the end of life, because that's what, for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure everyone knows what hospice is. That's where you go to where the end is quite near. And I'm sure as a nurse, you were very comforting and helping for the family. And, being that you turned into a a grief coach, you may be even more empathetic than maybe some other nurses might be. I'm not really sure about that, but you're dealing with it outside looking in, right? Because I don't know if you've dealt with grief or a loss of a loved one while when you became a hospice nurse. So that's my first question. Did you have any personal loss or grief in that respect before you became the hospice nurse?
Yeah, my grandparents had all died by the time I was, I think, in like seventh grade or
Okay.
eighth grade. The last two that were alive, like passed away that year. And so I had that, but then my senior year in high school, so in 2005, I had a cousin who we're very close to all our cousins, and he was 15 and he dropped dead on at track practice. So that was very obviously tragic, unexpected, especially when a child dies and you didn't see it coming, and he was very athletic. And so I had that experience. And also growing up, like we went to the nursing homes a lot because my
Really?
grandparents were older. My dad was older. My mom was 12 years younger. And so like just my grandparents, they were at that age where like when we were growing up, like they were in nursing homes.
Mhm.
And so I think just that like gave me compassion and empathy for seeing that side of it, being the family member who comes to visit the people and just most people don't have that experience, especially as young as I was, like,
Right.
oh, every weekend you go to a nursing home. Like that was my childhood. So, and it was good, but and like, it gave me a different viewpoint that I don't think a lot of people get to see. So that's probably that's what started me wanting to be a nurse overall.
First place. And
Mhm.
I know like when we spoke briefly before we went, recorded, you said you enjoyed it so much being a hospice nurse. And some people might be like, wow, how is that enjoyable? And it's not the subject matter that's enjoyable, watching people die. It's enjoyable, meaning that you're there and nurturing and helpful for people in their grief. And then also for the people on the last days, you're making them as comfortable as possible, whether they're coherent or not. You're still there giving support and empathy and care. So, I was just curious. So then, you know, you're now experiencing all the things you just said, and each individual one alone is so hard, right? I know I lost my dad. He was very young. He was only 55. And we'll get into my story as well with grief because I'll have plenty of questions for you. Because I also had no one to speak to, right? And just no one's, I was young and just all those feelings. So, but what I wanted to ask was, and I lose my train of thought all the time. So let me just think where I was going here. Oh, I wanted to ask, like, that in and of itself is you lost your dad and it's cancer, and it's not a fun way to watch someone, it's usually slow or slowish. And, it's obviously cancer is not something you like to sit and watch by as a family member watching a loved one. So that in and of itself, and then your dad is now in hospice for 3 months, right? So now not only are you the nurse, now you're the daughter. And then, I want you to tell a little bit about the story about your mom because she died in a winter storm. Like that's just, from what it sounds like to me, just off the cuff, is like, was she out in a winter storm? Like it was in an accident? So I want to hear more about that. And it doesn't really matter how, I want the listeners to hear. It doesn't matter how each of your parents passed away. The fact that they passed away so close together
Mhm.
is devastating. And then
Mhm.
on top of that, during that same time is when you found out about your husband's,
Mhm.
let's say, betrayal, or not just being, truly open with you about what was going on. So that's three different types, well, actually two different types of grief, but you still, daughter to mom is different than daughter to dad, and then your husband. So all at the same time. And I'm would assume that that is where most of your coaching comes from, is from everything that you've been through, that so you can help the people who are going through any of the grief they're going through. Because not only was death, it is now the grief of your husband's, for lack of a better word, infidelity. Infidelity does not always have to be cheating on you.
Right.
And I know for me, I've used it in my, relationship in a different matter whatsoever. But just to give the analogy, how I was trying to explain myself to my husband was, I feel like you cheated on my trust.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that is it's a hard thing to explain to other people because they didn't. Is it horrific? Yes. Is it like they cheated on you or they did like it's almost like the same, but it's not. So
Mhm.
let's go through your emotions and all those things going on at those times. And what did you do in that time period that you look back now and can say, like, wow, I that got me through it. Like maybe during that time you're like, this, I don't even know if I want to be here anymore. I don't know if I want to be with this man. I'm going through all this shit. COVID. Everyone's worried about COVID. What about me? What about everything that just happened to me? So give us some background on like your thoughts that were going there, your day to day. Like how did you get through to where you are today?
Yeah, so like after all of those things, right? Like, and I mean, basically, I had given birth 6 weeks before my dad died. So, I mean, really, we were like the newborn phase also, right? Every
What else can you throw
baby,
in that mix?
right? All right, I know. Like, my sister one time was like, well, like through work, like you can call, like if you have like life things that happen. And she's like, I think you meet about four of the life changes that have
Right.
happened. So it's like, yeah,
Just to interrupt you, just to get some I want to like picture myself there. What number child was that?
number six.
Okay, so you already had five.
Yep.
You have five. Then you got the
Yep.
newborn, and then your
Yep.
dad passed away.
Yes. Yep. And my oldest was 8. She was just turned 9 after my dad died. So
Wow.
young kids too. So yeah, so like when my dad, when we knew he was gonna go on hospice, like as the hospice nurse, so I was very pregnant at that time. I was the one, we went with a different agency, right? Like I wasn't his direct nurse, that would be not kosher,
Right.
ethical. But I was the one who made the phone calls. I knew, like ask for the hospital bed and a commode and like what kind of things we're gonna like maybe a gate belt, like all the things, like all the supplies, like okay, like
So
so
he was
I
at
was the one
home. I'm sorry, he was
he,
at home.
yes, he was at
Okay.
home. Yep, he stayed at home. So I was the one who kind of lined all that up. And then yeah, then I gave birth. And then um so then my dad, like we knew things were getting closer. It was hard for me because as the hospice nurse, I knew it was coming, but I would forget that my siblings didn't necessarily know.
Right.
Um, so then I finally like that kind of clicked like a few weeks before he died. And so I called my brother and I was like, no, like this is what you'll see. This is what like it's not like what you see on TV. Like they're not gonna like just go like say these beautiful words and then just die. Like it's not pretty. He's probably gonna be unresponsive for the final days. Maybe we don't know. Like this is what it'll look like. So explaining that was hard. To be the nurse, but also to be the daughter. And then I also struggled a lot with my dad was very, very stubborn. He did not want to take medication, but then he was in pain. He was in so much pain because he had prostate cancer, but by the time they had found it, it was already in his bones. So he lived with bone cancer for 10 years. And so his pain just progressively got worse, especially at the end. And he, didn't want to eat very much and just was extremely uncomfortable. And so I struggled a lot with his death and around that time with how am I being a good daughter, but how am I even being a good nurse if I can't even keep him comfortable? Like he's in so much pain, but he doesn't want to take the pain medication. I can't force him. And so like just that I don't know, grief around that, I guess that I felt like I was failing, that I couldn't
Right.
help him, that this is my expertise and I can't do anything about it. So that was really, really hard. And I think getting through that afterwards is it has helped for me to remind myself just how stubborn he was.
Hmm.
Like that I really truly I asked every nurse that I could, like, what would you do differently? Like what am I missing? Like, what else can we try? Like, I really like tried my hardest to think of every avenue to get him more comfortable. And, at the end of the day, like you can't make somebody do
Oh.
something they don't want to do.
Yeah, and I think the fact that let's take that it's your dad out of it for a second, even as a nurse with a someone that isn't your family member, and
Yeah.
being empathetic, you still might feel something, but at the end of the day, he was actually choosing to be that stubborn. And why you're bringing up the stubbornness, because anyone listening, as far as I know, I'm not a doctor, but prostate cancer is very preventable if
Mhm.
caught extremely early. So do you think that's part of the reason why it got so worse, got so bad? Obviously, it went everywhere because he was stubborn and wouldn't go to doctors. Is that something like how he
Oh
was?
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, he didn't go to the doctor
Yeah,
ever.
see,
I mean,
that's sad to me, because if I think I saw a billboard once that the number one killer of men is ignorance and stubbornness, because
yeah.
they it could have been prevented. And this episode is not about being proactive and stuff like that. It's
Right.
about our grief. But I was just curious because
Mhm.
if there, even though my podcast is catered to women, it is for everyone. So if you're a man out there, it's very important to do that prostate testing. I know my husband does it and is very on top of it. I believe he has an enlarged prostate, so he's very up on it. He's fine. My husband, I'm giving out his personal information. I'm sure he doesn't care. But it's just something like, why not be proactive? Because it's
Yeah.
something so treatable, and if you catch it early, so that's sad in and of itself. And I'm wondering if like that thought was in the back of your mind too, like, god damn it, why couldn't you just not be what you're being like?
Yeah, yeah, in the beginning, like I was very upset by that. Like
Yeah.
very, very upset that like this was totally preventable.
Yeah, and I think I've learned that in my coaching and in my own life, that we can only control our part in every aspect of our life. And it's frustrating when you're dealing with someone that you love, that's you can see doing something to themselves or not for themselves that is so detrimental, but there's nothing we can do about it. And that's a hard pill to swallow, if you want to use that analogy. And I want to just speak about mine real quick, because my dad had diabetes, and this is back before they knew as much as they do now. I remember when he first had to go on insulin, it was just like a regular number in the morning, and that was it. Like, you just whatever. And he was not the greatest eater. I think once he got put on insulin, he was probably figured like, oh, I can eat even what I feel
Hmm.
like, whatever. So he wound up having, I always felt bad because he died so young. And, in I'm not going to get into how our society operates on, go to work for a million years, then retire. And then that's when you're supposed to live your life, because that's basically what he did. He retired a little early, like at 54, because I think he knew he was sick, and he died subsequently at 55, but he had to be put on dialysis. And at the time, it was the kind you can do at home with like some type of IV drip, whatever. And he did it, whatever. He did what he had to do and then lived his life. But then it didn't even last long. But what I'm getting at is my father was a jokester. So I'll never forget the call. And I'm telling the story in case someone wants to resonate. And then, we're speaking about grief and death and all that stuff. So I remember him having some kind of prognosis that he had like, he started to get gangrenous. How do you say that?
Yeah, like gangrene.
Yeah, a little bit like on his toes, and then unbeknownst to me, until like when he had to tell me what I was about to tell you, it was on his penis. And like the doctors gave him like a really bleak future. Like, within 6 months, you'll probably pass or have to have body part after body part cut off. And since dialysis is considered life support, if you will, and he is of sound mind, he can choose to not be on it. And that's what he subsequently did. And I'll never forget getting that call, like, I'm going to take myself off of this. So now, I don't know how old I was at the time, in my early 20s. And like, you want him to do that, right? Because you don't want him to go with the future that they had pretty much laid out for him. I don't know if that would be the same as now as it is. This is back a while. But you're also like, now you have whatever it was, 14 days. Like, no one explained to us what it's going to be like. And he was one of my best friends. I hated him when I was younger, all the rules and everything, but he was like one of my best friends. And like, you don't even know what to do with yourself. And my family, I'm not going to get into everything, but everybody handled it so different, and everyone was high and low. So when I'm losing it, my brother was more of a rock. And then when, everyone changes, but it was a real, you're not prepared for that ever. But one of the things you said, like, we were all standing around his bed, and you don't know. I think my one brother used to work in a hospice, so I think he knew like what true death looks like. But so my father's there talking to us, and all of a sudden he goes, And if you're watching, if you're listening to this, you're not going to see me, but if you're watching the YouTube channel, you'll see me. All of a sudden, he's like, uh, uh, right. And I start hysterical crying. I'm like, ooh. And 10 seconds go by, not long goes by, and he wakes up. He goes, Elise loves me the most. She cried first. Like, that was what he kept telling me. We were like, what? He was, and that's how he was joking. I mean, I expected him at the funeral to pop up out of the casket and be like,
Yeah.
but I just love telling that story because he was just so funny. But I can get more into all the things that went on when he was, in the hospital because he was in the hospital for hospice, but you're definitely not prepared for it. So
Yeah.
that's what someone like you comes in. No one thinks of that. Like, I am now handed this and I'm supposed to deal with it. No one thinks like I should go get some help.
Mhm.
No one really thinks of that in that scenario. Maybe when you're, going through a divorce, you're going to get a lawyer. That's not emotional, but all these other aspects of life, like, oh, maybe I'll go to the doctor because I don't feel good. I'll go here. I'll go here. When someone's dying, you don't have even that thought to be like, I don't know how to do this. Maybe I can go to someone to help me through this type of thing. I don't even think people think that they should go to therapy, because that's not really what therapy is known for. Maybe after the
Yeah.
fact, but what about during? So is that something that you are there for? Like, I don't want listeners to think like, oh, once the person dies or once I have to go through all those other emotions that you're going to be going through. Is that something that you like to, I don't know what the right word is, maybe advertise? I can't think of the word for your services. Like, no, reach out to me during, like while you're going through this.
Yeah, I always think that the faster you can get help through something is the better it is. And that's where too, I always tell people, like, I always promote hospice. I'm like, always, the sooner that you can get on hospice services is the more you can take advantage of that. And so why not take advantage of it for 6 months instead of just like the final 2 weeks? And that's where I think coaching
Hmm.
comes in, is like, why not get help for those 3 to 6 months until until everything like starts coming to a head so much that you can't even function anymore. And so that's where I'm always a promoter of get help sooner,
I'm so
always.
glad you said that because I'm like sitting there with my mouth wide open because I thought hospice was for when the person is only like at the last 2 weeks of life. So you're saying that you can actually ask for hospice for your loved one who has a terminal illness months before they're supposed to, let's say, pass or predicted to pass. That's
Yes,
something that our
yep.
hospitals offer.
Yes. So a person who comes on hospice services have a terminal diagnosis and are no longer pursuing aggressive treatment. So
Hmm.
you're basically saying if this disease, cancer prognosis plays out, this person has 6 months or less to live. Now, that's not saying that they won't live for 8 months, 10 months, but just based off of, like if nature takes its course,
Very interesting.
we're giving you 6 months or less. So that's really what hospice is. So yes, you can have hospice, and most people don't know that. They think
No.
it's when somebody's actively dying. And
Yes.
by then, when you come in and you're trying to manage somebody's pain after they've already been in pain for a long time, like it's hard to get on top of that. It's
Right.
hard to get ahead of that. And that's the same with like coaching. Once you're in that much pain, it's hard to get on top of that.
Right.
So
Of
the
course.
sooner that you can do that is the
I mean,
better.
I think that's going to be the lesson of the day on this particular podcast for those of you listening, that if you are going through this now, or every one of us on this planet are eventually going to have a loved one go through something, and cancer is, a top killer in the in our world right now, right? So
Yeah.
that alone, I know for me, is an eye opener, and it's also making me. I'm going to go full blown vulnerable, how I usually am on these podcasts. Um, Even a little bit angrier at I say ex sister in law because she's my current sister in law, but we wrote her off because of who she is as a human. But it just goes to show you, my husband's mom just passed away this past the end of June from cancer, and she wasn't she stayed with the sister, and I'm not going to get into all the gory details of a toxic narcissistic human, but there was no hospital bed, there wasn't any comfort for this woman, and we found out even how worse how bad it really was, and she didn't even have it at the end. like so. And I truly don't think it's because she didn't know, but I'm going like personal here. But it makes me even more angry that I wish we would have known that we could have gotten if we were allowed to even go there. But people don't know that. I don't think anyone that I know or I've ever spoken to, and I certainly didn't know it myself, that if you have a terminal illness and you're predicted to, I like to go to the other side, pass over, continue on the next, plane, within 6 months or less, that you have care, that you have access to. I don't think anyone knows that. So everyone make note of that.
Yeah.
So I have some questions for you, and we'll keep going. But there's the 7 stages of grief, and I don't know if you know them by heart. You probably went through them up and down, left and right. And the 7 stages of grief are interchangeable, and they don't go in order, and they're not linear. But let's let the listeners hear them, so that if you are going through grief,
Mhm.
and you may think that you're the only one feeling the things you're feeling. So what are they?
Well, I usually tell people like I go with like 5 stages. So I've heard anywhere from 5 to 7.
All right.
Um, and they're denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are the ones and I learned this too. It's the stages of grief were originally made for the patient, if you will, like the person
Oh,
who had the diagnosis.
oh,
And and that's where more of that bargaining and that kind of stuff comes in. But I have found that they're pretty similar still when you're on the other side of it.
I think so. Because
Yeah.
you may not be going through it, and you not might well, I shouldn't say it's similar, because you're not the one leaving our planet. But I do agree with that. And I think a lot of people, I actually will give you a backstory. I just got my eyelashes done, if you can see them, everyone. And the girl doing my eyelashes, I basically was coaching her through her grief, because she was being so hard on herself. She lost her girlfriend. And those of you listening, I go off topic all the time. So she said partner, and I don't know what it is with this new terminology of like my partner. So what, I don't understand why you can't say boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, and wife, because then it lets me know what I'm dealing with. So I don't say what's his name when it's a her. You know what I mean? So anyway, her partner, and I had to like dig a little deeper. Her girlfriend passed away only 3 weeks prior to her being at work. And she was, we started talking. I was telling her, have to, give yourself some grace. I mean, when she started doing the eyelashes and we're talking, she's like, I feel like I got to get over it already. And like, I can't stop crying. And I just stay home. I don't go out. And of course, the logical question was, how long ago was this? Because you're expecting someone to be saying that it's been a while, and they can't shake it, right? And she was like, 3 weeks. I'm like, holy shit. You're experiencing so many things. And she did say one of the things was angry. A lot of people say this, they get angry at God.
Mhm.
So what would you be, what would, how would you help someone through that? Because that could be a whole nother episode too. But um,
Yeah.
God comes into that whole conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Because I have a very strong. I'm Catholic. I was born and raised Catholic. I have a very strong faith. But needless to say, that year shook me to my core. And I was angry at God. And I think that's where people kind of fall off, right? Like the faith wagon or whatever you want to call it, is because they either one think, well, like I shouldn't be angry at God. I can't be angry at God. Or you just harbor it in your heart and you just shut him out. And for me, I leaned on my faith a lot. And my priest one time told me that, like, you are not that big that your anger, like, will shock God, right? Like, you're not that exciting. You're not like, and the other thing too is like, I believe in God as a loving father and that he wants us to come to him. He wants us to show him our pain. And like, so I did like, again, my priest really encouraged me to like take time to like yell, scream, like tell God, how could you? Like, I have been a faithful Catholic. I did everything right. Like, why am I being punished? Like, why is this happening to me? Like, it wasn't bad enough. You took my parents, now my husband, like, and I feel like even then I kept showing up. And when the other person isn't ready to change, like, man, that is hard. And I was very angry at God. But I also brought it to him. I brought it to him. I yelled about it. And then after I yelled about it and I screamed and I cried and I had my little temper tantrum, like, then I also said, okay, Jesus, I trust in you. Like, I don't know the bigger purpose in this. I don't know what's going to come of this. I don't know if this marriage is going to survive. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I trust in you. I trust that you have my goodness in your hands
Mhm.
and that you're always going to love me through it. So that helped me so much. Once I did that, that kind of helped me flip a corner and be like, okay, like, all right, like I'm not alone. God's got my back. And granted, like, you know what, that comes and goes. It wasn't just like rainbows and butterflies
Right.
from then on
Of
out.
course.
Like it was
Nothing,
a lot of hard conversations with my husband. Um, a lot of praying that like he will change because the way it was going, like there was still hiding, there was still lying that I found out years out. Like he just kept doing it.
Mhm.
And so, praying that my husband would get to a point where he would hit that low and it would be enough and he would be like, okay, or the strength that if it came to that if because God doesn't want us to be victim. He doesn't want us to be abused. And like that's where I kind of got to the point where like something has to change because I'm not just going to keep being lied to, being stolen from, um, being the punching bag. Like God doesn't
Right.
want that.
And
So,
we'll get to that story. And like
yeah,
the I don't want to go down the religious avenue
right.
at
Yeah.
all because that's for me especially. But what I want to touch on in that whole and I'm thank you for sharing all that because there are listeners that will need to hear that because that's what like I said, the eyelash girl was feeling that.
Yeah.
Just anger in itself, whether
Yeah.
whether it's like God or however you want to do it, just being angry is very important. And I think in any thing that you're going through when you have the anger, and we'll utilize the grief because this is what this podcast is about, is you have to let it out, you have to scream it out, you have to write it out, whatever you're angry at, because if you try and hold it in, it's just going to seep out in other ways, and it's part of it. So that's why I wanted to have you on, because it is part of it. So try to accept the anger but also get it out of you, because I say this all the time. It's a great friend of mine's expression, and they have a community church, ayahuasca church, actually, not a regular church, but they say the only way out is through. And that's with all of our self-development and personal growth and growth through challenges and obstacles in our life. So I'd like to touch on, if you will, if you're vulnerable enough to tell a little bit about you don't have to tell me exactly what your husband did, but the feeling of the that first betrayal, right? Because now you're grieving. Like, instead of me putting words in your mouth, what did that grief feel like? What kind of words can you express to give that feeling of what you felt when you found out?
Yeah, gosh, it was such a sharp, intense pain in my chest like I have never felt before. Like, so how I found out was, and I shared this, my husband is fine with me sharing kind of our story. What he was doing was he would lie about, oh, I paid this bill or this and this, but really what he had, I don't know, an addiction in was baseball cards, collectibles, that kind of sports hobby, wrestling figure types of collectible type things.
Okay.
And it got to a point where he would open up a credit card, he would max out that credit card, then he would open another credit card to try to pay that credit card. And then he would just max out that credit card because he was trying to hide it from me. And it was getting to a point where like, with 6 kids, and then like I had taken time off work for maternity leave, like well, with my dad, it was fell into maternity leave time. And then with my mom, I took time off work that I really didn't have time built up. And so all of our finances were pretty dire at the
Yeah.
time. Um, and so we couldn't hide it anymore. And so he just stopped paying on credit cards. And so how I found out was I was at home with I don't know how many how half the kids were home still, not in school. Um, and I got a knock on the door. I had to sign for a letter. It was like an official letter. And I opened it up and it was saying that we owed like I think the first amount I saw was like I want to say it was like 10 to $12,000 on this credit card. And I was just
Shocked.
first I was shocked, right? Because I'm like, we're up to date on our bills. Like we talk about this, we have open communication about what needs to be paid. And we would sit down and do the bills. And even like looking back, we fought every single time. And because he was very manipulative and very like secretive and then defensive and then blaming me, right? Like about the whole situation. And so when I first got that letter, first I was like, well, this can't be true. And then like, you kind of like,
Put it
no,
all
yeah,
together.
probably is. Like, so then I called him and then at first he denied it. And then he came home from work and like he continued to deny it, which made me angrier. And then, just finally then he admitted to, yeah, okay, I've done that. But I think it would have been like a day and a half. Like he wouldn't admit it
Yeah, which
for a while.
he didn't want to admit it to
Yeah.
himself. It's
Yeah.
embarrassing. I mean, like I said, this podcast is like we could spin off. We can go through three other
Yeah.
ones. Because speaking about addiction and being, maybe being on the other side of addiction and the reason why people do that. But let's bring it back to that sucker punch of and what turns into grief is the trust sucker punch, I guess, right? You could say like you just would never think that your husband, and I'm assuming in all other aspects of your life, he's a great guy, whatever. Like, I'm just gonna go there. And like
Yeah.
you that's why you least expect it,
Yeah.
especially my husband makes fun of the way I say especially um when you least expect it and when you have that open communication. So the grief is that loss of that undeniable trust.
Mhm.
And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because those of you listening, grief is not only for people who have passed on to the other side. And grief could be over a relationship. Grief can be over your career. I didn't even realize it. Actually, I'm giving it a title now. I didn't really know. I had grief over losing almost my identity, of who I used to be. It's so many things, and the stages of that grief are the same a little bit for all of them. And I think the grief that you're speaking about with your husband is that especially here I go again with that especially is not something you're, even thinking about they will ever happen, right? Death, those of us that have parents that are getting older, you can't act like you had no idea that if they passed away. I mean, if people are in their 80s, their 90s, chances are, that's when you would do expect death, right? Somebody much younger, of course, it's a little bit more of a surprise. But when you're married and you have a great relationship and great trust and you love your husband and everything's going great, that's when it's like, and what do you do with that? Like, and then when you said like they keep doing it, each time is more grief and each time is more trust taken. And then what part of you are you, that's when all like, you say to yourself, should I stay? Should I not? I don't want to not stay. I love him. Everything's great. So it's, a lot on your plate so that you're going through that at the same exact time. Let's circle back to a little bit on how you lost your mom and then how the three things propelled you to the person you are right now.
Yeah. So with my mom, I mean, it was so unexpected. I had seen her earlier that day. Like,
Wow.
so we had gone on, I have an older sister and a younger brother. I'm the middle child. So the three of us, and then my mom, and I had the baby with because, she was a baby. But we flew out to California because my dad's oldest sister was turning 90. And my dad had said, if you guys can, like, I really want you to go for that and be there for that. So we did. So we had gone, I think we flew out Thursday and we came back that Sunday. And so that Sunday, we all kind of went our separate ways, went back home. My mom, my brother at the time, he lived like a mile south of my parents. And so he came up and did the chores, because we felt like everything was still the way it was. Dad had just recently passed. Mom didn't want to make any big changes, yet. So he He had rode home with my mom from the little town we flew into. He rode home, did the chores, and she was like, "Well, I'll give you a ride home." And he's like, "Well, like it's fine. You don't have," and she's like, "No," because I think she wanted to see the grandkids, right? So like she gave him a ride home, like a mile away from her house, and didn't even shut the garage door because she was just running down quick. And when I say storming, it's North Dakota here. So for those of you that know,
Listeners, that's
yeah.
another thing that she has on her plate. She lives in North Dakota, so that alone also that's hard. That's
Yes. So to me, a
why she
little
has six
storm.
kids. There's nothing.
Yeah. Yes, that's why. We have a lot of storms. So to me, when I say it was like storming, it's probably, I don't really consider it wasn't much of a storm, but other people are probably like, oh my gosh. Um, but the way that her drive that spring, it had flooded a lot. And so her driveway was very this little narrow gravel road with water on all sides of it. And the water was like right up level with the road. And
Wow.
so when it had snowed that winter, the snow and the road, you could kind of see sometimes like a little bit of gravel going through. But that evening, it was snowing a little bit and the wind was blowing. So then when the wind would blow, all the snow and stuff, and you couldn't see.
Mm,
So you're just basically blindly driving into this little driveway. And it was dark out, and she drove that 40 years of her life. Like that, she lived out there for however long they were married, like forever. You would never think that you wouldn't know where the turn was. But the way that the road conditions, the storm, it was blowing just right, the way the water was equal with it. She came back from dropping off my brother, and you could see later on, we could see where the tire tracks, and she turned just like the turn of the driveway, but she was about, I don't know, 6 feet off, 8 feet off. And so went out onto the water without knowing until I'm sure her car went through. And then we didn't realize she was missing until that next morning. My brother went up there to do chores. Yeah, and realized, like, oh my gosh, the garage door's open. Her car's not here. That's not normal. She had an appointment with like a lawyer or something or tax guy that morning. So he called him. He's like, no, she hasn't been here. So my brother called us, like, have you heard from mom? It's like, no, I haven't talked to her since, the night before when we all left separate ways. And so he called the authorities, and it took a while because you couldn't see the tire tracks right away. And so we honestly thought maybe she went off the road because there was another little narrow part farther into the driveway. Our driveway was like a mile long. And so there's another little part where like the water was almost over the road, and it was very sketchy. And so we thought that's probably where she slid off the road and went in the water. So they searched there, they didn't find anything. And then that night, as it got dark, and we were all out searching because Alzheimer's runs on my mom's side of the family. So I'm like, well, did the stress, like, did she get
trigger.
lost somewhere?
Mm.
So we were all driving around. Neighbors were out searching for her. We looked every place we possibly could think of, couldn't find her. And then that evening, as the wind died down, you could very clearly see her where her tire tracks had gone.
Wow. So you went through the usual, I don't want to use, I'm not going to like diminish it, the usual and customary ways that people could think of parents' death, right? Like usually it's, they're older and maybe a disease and you have to watch them die. And like that's what people like are quote unquote used to, right? And then you have this tragic, unexpected death of your mom, and that's the type that's not expected at all, no matter what age the person is. That alone, these just those two things alone, make you the nurse recovery, grief recovery coach that you are, along with what happened with your husband. And those listening, I just want to remind you that all these three things happened on top of each other. And then I will reiterate again with six kids in
Yeah.
North Dakota. 6 kids in North Dakota, and not to make a joke. But that's amazing. Like, how old was your mom?
My mom was 63.
So
My dad was
young,
75. Yeah, she was
63
young.
years old.
Yeah.
That's young. I mean, basically a tragic car accident, and who knows how long after your dad died that accident happened. I know you said this already, but
Yeah, it was like 4.5 months because my dad died at the very end of July, and my mom was the beginning of
so
December.
4.5 months, which is still fresh and new. I know you might have gotten used to it a little bit. So who knows what she may have been thinking of, or just like you said, it could just be one of those things and just what you went through. So some other things that I wanted to speak with you on the podcast so that listeners can hear and listen how you can help them is having to go through the loss of your loved ones things or phone calls. I know for me, I'm not going to get into this story either because I just want to, this is for you, but I had a younger sister that committed suicide. And I don't know how far after this call was, but like a shoe store called and left a message. Back in the day, you had a voice message, a voice message,
Yeah.
ask, it was something about asking her about picking up the shoes or something about the shoes. And it was just like, God, like you weren't expecting it. And then I know with my mom, I'm gonna get into my whole family thing, but my mom so soon after my dad died, like went through all these things and like got rid of them. And as a young child, you're like, how can you do that? You didn't love him. She started actually dating right away. And like as in now that I'm gonna, older, that was just her way of dealing. And, I certainly was very angry with her. But how do you deal with having to go through the things or a family member not acting the way you think that they should be acting during grief and all those things that you certainly aren't thinking about in your daily life until it starts happening to you?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I would say like ask yourself what it is that you're feeling or why you're upset. And like just talking through that can help, even if you just question it or write about journal about it. Because like you said, when your mom started going through your dad things so quickly, like that was her way of coping. And everybody handles things so differently. Like my mom didn't really go through anything, didn't want to change anything because her and my dad had talked about it. Like my dad didn't want her to do anything really big till, at least about a year afterwards. Um, and so they talked about that. And so she, was gonna do that. But I do think for a lot of people like that is just their way to cope. Like some people don't hardly ever want to go through anything, and some people want to go through right away and just get it over with and like, and I can see both ways. But I think again that whole we have so many expectations on other people and how we are grieving and how we're handling it. We just think that's the right way and how everybody should handle it and go through it. And then there's that tension and there's, and my brother and sister and I are all very different people. We handle things very differently. There's some similarities, but like we're pretty different. And so there was tension. There was a lot of times where like I would, because we had to go through everything then. Like
Yeah.
we my my dad, I mean, maybe he wasn't technically a hoarder, but he had a whole farm to hoard up, and he was actually born on the farm, like
Wow. So
not in a hospital, like born on the farm. In like so the old house where he was born was still there.
with
It's
all this
just,
shit.
yeah, it's just filled with shit because he anything he didn't want to get rid of, he would just put over there. And then Quonset and barns and like then a house, right? And so there was so much stuff to go through and it was so overwhelming. And we very fortunately had time on our side. We didn't have to, they owned the house. My dad built the house. Like we didn't have to sell it, to or like if you're renting a place and you're gonna you have till the end of the month. Like we didn't have the time pressure. And so I'm very thankful for that because there's just a lot of emotions that come up. And then when you're getting rid of things, like it feels like you're losing them all over again. And
Sometimes.
there's a finality to that on top of, I can't even call them and ask them, like, where did you get this from? Or what was this for? Like, you can't, like, it's just done. And so it is a very, very hard process. And, you know, I, I just think that the more that you can be in touch with your feelings and emotions during that time is the more helpful it is. I know it sounds counterintuitive because we want to push that aside. We don't want to think about it. We just want to charge ahead.
Right.
But that's what helped me the most. At that point in time, I had found life coaching. Um, so that helped me a lot. I had a coach at that time. I had somebody to talk to. And, even the first time that obviously like when my mom was missing, we had gone out to the farm to be out there, look for her. But then we had kind of went our separate ways. And we were coming back out there for Christmas. And I think that was the first time I was going to drive past the spot where she went in the water. And like the anxiety that I had from that was so high. And I hear people like all the time where like I drove by the grocery store they used to shop at, or I drove by the church. And all of a sudden, like
Yeah.
I'm panicking, like I'm so anxious, like I'm stressed out. And like, to talk to somebody about that is very, very helpful because
Yeah.
it's just a lot.
I think the common thread, and I'm sure the people, my listeners know the common thread is, life coaching is, superb. You should always have a life coach no matter what you're going through or somebody to speak to. But the common thread is I'm a firm believer in have the conversations with yourself.
Yeah.
Don't make decisions in emotion. So take that step back and to be aware. Once you're aware, when you find life coaching or even these podcasts or anything that you're, self-exploratory to better your life or the better what you're going through, whatever you are, it's more of that like, whoa, the biggest thing that you could do is take 5 minutes to yourself before you do anything. When you notice yourself getting, really emotional, whether anger or sadness, whatever it may be, and to just start that, like you said, that inner dialogue. There's a lot of things we feel are based on guilt that we don't need to have. Maybe with this subject matter, going through something, maybe you feel like, oh, they really loved it, but you have no use for it and you don't want it. And then you'd be like, but they would be mad at me. And you have this whole thing. And then if you take that step back and say, is that really true? How could, you just have to just start speaking to yourself. And, speaking of guilt, you want to recognize that. And with the help, I'll push life coaching again with somebody. I know with my um in-laws, my before my mother-in-law just passed away this past June, but her husband was still alive and he had like Alzheimer's and he really needed to be put in a facility. It was actually assisted living, it was beautiful, but she felt so guilty because they discussed you never put each other in an earth, you never do that. And I think that's a conversation that you should never have with the nevers, because how
Yeah.
do you know? So,
Yeah.
a lot of those things may be resting in your mind when your loved one dies and now you're going through their things. They might have put that, and maybe they did it on purpose, maybe not, doesn't matter, but that pressure on you to do something that you can't carry out and that it's almost unfair. And you have to look at it for what it is and
Mhm.
be okay with maybe not doing something that they wanted that you can't carry out or whatever. Don't ever sell the house if I die. Some people, guess what? You might have to, and you just have to deal with things that are best for your well-being in that time. And a lot of times we don't know what that is because we're not taught. And that's when going to someone like yourself, coming to someone like me can help you through these difficult decisions, because when you're in the midst of it, it's hard to see outside looking in. And that's, when you should seek help. And I commend you for being the coach that you are, because that's not a fun go get them, let's get you that new career, whatever subject. This is that's a rough one. And I'm glad you do that, because I don't know if that's a subject that people are like you said, oh, it's very touchy. Like, no, you need someone that's been there and you've been there,
Mhm.
major league, even from your childhood, right? That your cousin was young. You've experienced it in so many different ways, and you experienced it for yourself so deeply that you are like the go-to grief coach. You know what I mean? So, just trying to think of some of the things I wanted to ask. What was probably looking back? This is a weird question to ask. Like, of the three losses, which one impacted you the most?
Mhm. I I really think the marriage, because it was ongoing. Like I was currently, it wasn't just okay, this happened. Like, there have been times obviously where like I wish I could call my mom and ask her advice. So it still is ongoing. But like with the marriage, it was every day, all day, like in your face, like like the choices I make are gonna affect my children with this. So like, what do I do? Like it was so intense. And then, like I said, it went on for years. Like I think it was maybe a year ago that I found out about like the final hidden PayPal account. Like, he finally brought that to light and confessed that. And so it just
Going.
kept trickling along, like thinking, okay, that's everything. Like you're being honest with me. Yes, that's everything. And then 6 months would go by and well, there's actually this other thing. Like, and most of the time I would find out about them like accidentally,
Mm.
through like another thing through the mail or checking, being more diligent about our bank accounts and so finding things like that.
Yeah,
That went
I think
on.
that one I was going to say, death is certain. Like you
Hmm.
just, it, and even if you get surprised by it, you have to deal with all your emotions and stuff. But it's not like, oh, she's going to die again, or this is
Hmm.
going to. And I
Right.
agree with that. When you have that initial grief, that initial shock, that initial betrayal, that initial infidelity of trust type of thing, and then you trust again, and it keeps happening. It
Mhm.
is it's it almost it doesn't hurt as much as by the third time, the fourth time, but then you start questioning, is it going to be this time? And is it going to be this time? And then I know you have to say to yourself, you get to choose, right? You get to choose, should I stay or should I not stay? And I think there's a little piece of us in those situations, or you and people that I've, help as well, that and what sucks about this is there's always that little part of you that is not fully 100% trust you like you did the very first time. And
Yep.
that's something that you have to live with because I don't think it ever goes away. And I was just going to ask you, and I know this whole podcast isn't about marriage and betrayal and all that stuff, but like you brought it up, it is grief. Do you feel like that you could be like, no, this is it. This is going to be, that's it. It's never going to happen again.
I I mean someday maybe. At this point, um no. I would say I'm really close. I'm about 97% positive it'll never happen again. And just for the fact that, I mean, we have both put in so much work into this marriage, and I have seen just from 5 years ago when all this came out, like the personal growth that he has gone through, that he has tried, like even I always said like the hardest thing that about this was the gaslighting, the way that he made me think that it was me, that I was crazy. And then when it all came out, it almost was a relief because it's like, I wasn't crazy. But then he would spin me again to hide the next thing. So it was that part of it that was so hard. And so he has really, really grown in that area where now when I question things, not always, but most of the time he puts the defensive away. He hears me. He's that like, he's like, are you just asking questions? Do you just want to be heard? Or are you like, you really want me to show you, where the money went, where this like, and sometimes it varies. Sometimes like, no, I know where the money went. I can see it. I know logically I should not be freaking out like this, but I'm not in a logical space right now. Like something triggered me and I'm like out of my mind with worry and like panic, stress situation. Like, so like I just need you to hear me. I need to be heard. I need my feelings to be heard. And so he's gotten really, really good at like just allowing me that space. And then, I part of the too is on my growth journey is I have found specific ways to say no. Like when I say I need you to listen, I need you to listen. I don't want anything else. When I say I'm done, like I want you to say, okay, can I give you a hug? I want you to say these words to me. Like
Specific.
that, yeah, very, very specific from my side of it. So then he knows also like what I need and we're not butting heads with it. So like I would say, yeah, I'm 97% there of saying, and also because just a month or probably about 6 weeks ago, he opened a card shop to sell baseball cards and collectibles. So I think that shows how much growth we've done is that like the thing that almost tore our marriage apart, like he now has a business in and he's thriving and he's doing really
That's
well.
awesome. That's like a happily ever after story right
Yeah.
there. I don't think it has anything to do with what he's doing, the cards or whatever.
Right.
It's the I mean, like I said, this is a grief episode, but it's when it sounds like he was willing to admit that it's almost like a gambler. It's almost
Yeah.
like an addiction. And when you face it for what it is, then you can get help for it. And
Yeah.
he doesn't want to be lying to you. He loves
Mhm.
you. And it sounds like I said, it sounds like it's not like he has all these other issues of this
Right.
shitty husband. He had issues. It's really within himself.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing that you can grow together, because that's what happens in relationships. Relationships aren't linear either. And when
Mhm.
even in the best of relationships, the best of marriages, if people don't grow together, that's sometimes why people grow apart. And especially, here I go with that word again. If my husband ever listens, he's going to hear me say especially. Especially when you're both willing. And I don't like the word doing the work, because it sounds like what's the right word? Relationships shouldn't be work, but the communication and the respect needs to sometimes be adjusted, especially when someone did something,
Yeah.
literally wrong and they know it's wrong. So power to you guys, and I think he probably realizes what a gem he has in you, because there's a lot of people that be like, screw you, I'm out of here. You did this 10 times already. You're a great father. You're great in every other area, but this area is overpowering. So I would think that he really is grateful for that. And, everyone knows that listens to me that gratitude is like the number one thing you should have in life. So I'm glad that worked out for you. And how can people find you, so that if they are going through grief, and if do you have anything going on now? Are you giving away any special, like giveaways, or is there anything someone could, I'm losing my words here because I'm still on the especially thing. How can people find you and maybe reach out to you if they needed your services?
Yeah, so you can find me at nursegriefcoaching.com. And you don't have to be a nurse. I just use that because I am a nurse, but nurse grief coaching. And I run different things throughout the year. I'm trying to get up different groups for people like to be in the groups, but always I tell people just book a free consult call with me. That's always there. And then that way I can kind of lead you in the right direction for the next steps. Or, maybe we're not a good fit. Maybe you do need therapy or counseling, or maybe I'm not your wheelhouse and I can refer you to somebody else. So always, yeah, just book the free consult is the best way to start.
Absolutely. And that's for any of us. There's and never when we, for the listeners to hear, there's never any pressure on these calls. It's just for us to get to know you, know your situation, see if we could be of some help. And if it's not us specifically, we might know someone else or resources or some way to guide you. So don't ever pause about getting help, because that's what we're here for. So I love to ask this question on my podcast, and I'm going to ask you, what is one thing that you would love to tell your younger self? Like, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self? And it doesn't
Hmm.
have to do with grief, anything like that, but just,
I, yeah, I think to have more compassion for myself. Um, I did not realize how mean I was to myself all the time. And that's something that coaching has really
yep,
changed in my life, and I will forever be grateful for. And also to take, I hate the word self-care. I feel like it's so overused, but like
yeah,
really, self-care can be so simple. I wish I would have like once a month went out and gotten coffee and read a book in a coffee shop. Like something so simple, but to just recharge my batteries. I mean, there was a full decade where I never had a day off. I mean, I had baby after baby after baby, nursing up all night, then
mhm,
went to work as a nurse, and then I'd come home and my husband would go to work, and so I'd take over at home, and like I look back at that version of myself and I just like I want to give myself a hug and just
mhm,
say, slow down, like, you know, having the dishes done, it doesn't have to be done at 10 o'clock at night. Like it'll still be there in the morning. That's not what matters. And sometimes I think, especially as young moms, we get caught up in that,
yeah, perfectionism,
what we think should be Pinterest perfect or
right.
worthy of everything. And just like in
What
the
what
long
you're
term, it
saying,
doesn't matter.
what you would say is don't be so mean to yourself and
Yeah.
take some time and take care of yourself first so that you can show
Yeah.
up to the world in the best way possible. So
Yeah.
I'm big on affirmations, and that message that you just said to yourself is many listeners need to hear that. And I've spoken about this many times on social media and like especially for women, because men do it too, but we are so mean to ourselves. We would never speak to someone else the way we speak to ourselves. So, you know, you can listen to podcast episodes or future episodes on how to catch yourself doing that. So thank you for bringing that up because it's so prevalent with us women, and I don't know why, but it is. So,
Yeah.
what I'm very big on affirmations. So, what is, and this doesn't have to be your forever one, like for right now in your life, what is your I am statement?
Mhm. I am amazing and can do hard things.
Awesome. And I love when the guests say it because it's not just Nichole's, it's anyone. So if you don't know, like, oh, I don't know what affirmation should I use, you just heard a great one. I am amazing and I can do hard things. So there's your affirmation for today, listeners. You can repeat that to yourself all day today because you too are amazing and you too can do great things. So it was so wonderful having you here. I know we went down a lot of rabbit holes, but that's my MO. And you have a lot of things going on. I mean, just like I said, 6 kids, North Dakota, nursing, all the stuff you went through. I mean, that's just, that's a lot. And, thank you for being you and thank you for being here on the podcast. And listeners, remember, if you're going through something and you need some help, just reach out to Nichole and she can guide you on your, next best steps. So till next time, everyone, I wish you much love and light. Thank you so much.
Yeah.